So I'm curious, how many of you are product managers? And how many would be product owners, maybe if you're not a product manager? And how many would be designers of any flavor? How about engineers? And what else? Is anybody, any other roles here in the room? What do you guys do? What do you do?
I also coach for all these roles.
Okay. Okay, so good. Because this is actually my first visit, professional visit. I played in Queenstown once, but this is first time for me for work, and so it's my first chance to really meet some teams. And I'll have a lot more of that this week, but you guys are actually the first group. I just came in. And so I am still learning kind of like where you're at on that spectrum as a tech hub. It's certainly a great sign, as many of you are here. It's a great sign that TradeMe has these incredible, look at the view. Well, I'm looking at it, you guys can't see it. And zeros right across the front. You guys are obviously the start of a tech hub for sure. But I don't really know how far you are along on that journey. And by the way, that's not a US versus the rest of the world thing. Most of the tech hubs I visit in the US are in the US, and they are, lots of them are a fraction of the size of Wellington. So, you know, they're at all stages along there. So anyway, we'll have to sort of see as we go. I have a talk that's just kind of a fun talk that is hopefully interesting, but really, honestly, it's really a way to tee up a bunch of questions and dialogue. So feel free to jump in. You don't have to raise your hand. Just jump in anytime. It's actually a nice small group, relatively small group. We can keep it interactive. So feel free. Just jump in as we go. And I'll kind of let your questions steer me. I think it's just specific to you. I'll just ask to talk to you afterwards. But my guess is it would be general. So let's do it that way if you can. And we'll see. We'll see what you think. And I have some we can talk to as advanced topics as you like. I like that too. All right. You heard from Tokes there a little bit about well, just as far as I did start as an engineer at HP Labs. So the first 10 years of my career was in writing software. But then really I was incredibly lucky because some of you may know the original internet company was Netscape. That was really the birth of the internet industry, and I worked for Marty Cagan. He was the co-founder, and I ran platform and tools. So I had things like the JavaScript team and the SSL team and all the plugins, and actually the developer program, which was the most fun of all, because that's when I got to meet all the startups and also large companies that were trying to figure out what the internet was all about and what they could do with it. And actually that's where I met Pierre Omijar, who was the co-founder of eBay. I know TradeMe is a similar kind of business, so those of you from TradeMe kind of know that kind of business. And that was a blast. eBay was really the first application that was a true child of the internet. And so I got to sort of watch from the side as it got started when I was at Netscape and just little bits of interaction. But then when Netscape was eventually acquired, Pierre or eBay asked me to come on. I was their original head of product and design, and just because they had a bunch of engineers and they definitely had a bunch of buyers and sellers getting started, but there wasn't product or design competency in the company yet. So I hired a bunch of people and we got to work. After eBay, I just started the Silicon Valley product group with a few friends, and that's just a fun. We just invest in advising startups and growth stage companies. It's a blast. So that work has kind of got me in early on with Google and a little later Facebook and Twitter and most of the interesting tech companies that we've had a chance to work with. So it's a lot of fun. And when I see companies do well with things, I'll share the techniques and really spread those techniques. That's really what I do. Anyway, this particular talk is probably one of the most enduring myths about product and something that I think is a critical for, if Wellington is going to break out as a tech hub, this is probably one of the most important points to get, because everybody seems to miss this initially for years, and that is that they think the way we get great products is by listening to our customers.
It's actually worse. People preach you should talk to your customers and ask them. And if you ask someone, would you like Amazon Prime? They would go, what on earth is that?
Yeah, well, that's what I'm going to really go into. Jeff Bezos, for those who don't know, he's of course the CEO of Amazon. And every year he actually writes this shareholder update, which is an amazing letter. You should read every one of them back, but the last one especially was just golden. And anyway, his point is no customer ever asked for Amazon Prime. Similarly, he likes to tell his product teams, you will not figure out what to build by asking our customers. He likes to say, you will not, he actually goes further. He says, the biggest mistake you can make is asking your customers what to build. He says, it's also asking me what to build, the executives. But interestingly, he likes to say, the second biggest mistake you can make is not listening to your customers. So I'm going to really dive into that and show you how. Now, first of all, I should be very clear. Why is it that we can't go ask our customers what to build? And there's really two fundamental reasons that drive. And by the way, I would argue this is a big difference between if you're building tech products, like what hopefully all of you are doing, that's certainly what Trade Me and Zero are doing, and non-tech products, like consumer packaged goods. I don't know if anybody in the room is doing, it could be anything. It could be a new brand of soap or something. That's kind of what business school teaches, non-technical product management. And in that world, it's very different. But in our world, there's two big reasons why this doesn't work. Asking our customers. The first and most fundamental reason is that customers don't know what's technically possible. It's hard enough for us to keep on top of what's technically possible. It's changing every day. Right now, there's trends around still mobile is going crazy. Still, I just got back from China. It shows you that essentially the Western world is like a third world country compared to China when it comes to mobile. It's just amazing how much further they are. And of course, machine learning technology is kind of sweeping our industry. The customers can't be expected to know what's possible. They're paying us, essentially, hiring us as an expert for them on that. And the second reason is because with technology products, none of us really know what we want until after we see it. It's a really hard thing to imagine. And I've been guilty of this thousands of times. You think you know what you want, you work with a team, and then you prototype it, and then you see it, and you realize that's not what you want at all. And that's the nature of the game. So this is why in tech product companies we never do focus groups. Focus groups are exactly the opposite of this. Marketing might do focus groups for their own purposes, but for coming up with product, it's terrible because it falls into this trap. And so that's sort of the most basic concept in product. But a lot of people don't really do, and I want to make sure that comes out, but I want to go a step further too. And I want to talk about the role of engineers in this equation. So I've long told teams that if you're just using your engineers to code, you're only getting about half their value. So these are really a couple of the big differences between great product teams anywhere in the world, by the way. Great product teams, Shanghai has so many great product teams today. There's so much innovation. And most product teams is they understand that the customers can't tell them what to build, and the way they actually solve problems uses their engineers much more than most teams. And so I want to talk about, so just to make this clear for you, I'm assuming, are most of you using some form of Agile like Scrum here? Yeah. So if the first time your engineers see an idea is it sprint planning, you have messed up. So I want to be very clear. That's a clear sign to you you've screwed up on this. So we are talking about much earlier. That's where I'm going. So I have a few examples just to make sure we're all on the same page. And hopefully you agree with me that engineers really are essential to innovation. So I'm going to describe to you the backstories behind some of what I think at least are some of the most impressive innovations of the last few years. And first of all, you'll see that they all, none of them came from customers, of course. And that's not, by the way, a criticism of customers. I love customers. I mean, and I love Like at eBay, I loved sitting down with buyers and sellers, especially sellers. Buyers were pretty much everybody, but sellers were a unique breed on eBay. And I loved it, but that's not, we're not counting on them to explain to us the solution they need. They're counting on us. All right, the first example is a great new product line from Amazon, the Alexa line. You've probably all been following this. That's been an interesting, it's just in startup stage for them, even though most companies would probably consider it pretty successful already. It's just the tip of the iceberg. But interestingly, this was not one of those efforts where they have a lot of smart people starting with Jeff Bezos, but they did not have some big offsite and have some strategy and vision around a hub for the home. No, one of the teams was working on a really straightforward device, which was just they wanted a speaker that could handle voice control, just a voice controlled speaker. And they had a team, just a basic team, working on that. And they created a prototype for that. And one of the engineers on that team decided, just had an idea, because just down the hall was a team working on the streaming TV. Or they have another device. And he realized, you know what, I could actually use my prototype to make the voice control also control the TV, not just control the speaker. And he just hacked that together in a little prototype. And he showed it to the rest of the team, and they were like, oh my gosh, we have to look at this. And they ended up bringing more team. They ended up making it all the way to Jeff Bezos, and they're all like, oh, this is way bigger than our original idea. This is significant. And of course, this became the basis for us not only just the hub for the home, now they're actually pitching it as the hub for work too. So this is just getting started. But again, this came from an engineer understanding the power of a new enabling technology. And you're going to see that as a theme. Another really fun story, some of you may have been, I don't think New Zealand has a Disney park. There is one in China, and there's still pretty far away. But has anybody been to Disney World in Orlando since they did this yet? So here's what happened. Disney's got this whole ecosystem. It's an amazing company, actually. And they've been a very successful company. But at the start of their, if you will, their funnel, like we all have funnels, product funnels, but right near the top of their funnel are their parks. It's really what gets people hooked, mostly as kids, into the whole Disney ecosystem. And one of the things they started to see is that going to Disney World was not as fun as it used to be. And they saw that basically by the analytics. They saw that people were coming back less frequently, and they were spending less money when they were there. And these are bad signs if you're Disney. And so they knew that that was happening. And they actually had a pretty good idea why, too, from talking to these people, which was basically they were a victim of their own success. They got too crowded. These lines were, you could wait 2 hours for a ride, and the kids in the sun, this isn't fun, and just, it was too busy. So they got a team of very strong product team together with some really strong designers, strong products, strong engineering, and they said, look, go reinvent the park experience. Reimagine it. And they did. They put together a strategy. They ended up creating a whole prototyping lab. It was a secret for years, but it was located right behind Disney World, behind the Epcot. They set up a discovery lab where they could try out. They actually modeled the lines. They modeled everything. They created a device which came to be known as the Magic Band that everybody wears. Everything from buying your tickets at home to you don't know more lines to get into the park. You just walk right through. It recognizes you from the bands. Kids can go and buy food, and it just goes right on their band. They don't need to deal with payment. Re-schedules, schedules, everything. It cost them, actually, one of the impressive things to me is it cost them $1 billion just to re-platform, to put in the infrastructure in the park to support this. It just tells you how much money they make. They make so much money that that was minor compared to what they ended up bringing in. But that's a great example. There wasn't a customer who asked for the magic band. Most of them had no idea this stuff could be done, but they really kind of made the experience magical again.
But even if they might not have had a customer who articulated that to them directly, but their customers were telling them there was a problem.
Oh yeah, and again, they didn't have, that wasn't the mystery. They could see it in the numbers.
Right.
So they knew what was wrong. And the hard question though is, what do you do? What do you do when you're just too crowded? Too many people want to go, and now it's not fun for anybody. All right, this is one of my favorite examples, actually, Google Translate. You know, everybody knows Google things like AdWords and search and maps, but Translate actually is up to 500 million people use it every month. So a lot of people, now not so much in English-speaking countries, but for a lot of the rest of the world, this is a pretty go-to mission-critical app. And they have been working for years on this, and there's actually a way to quantify how good the translation service is. And in fairness, up until last year, if you asked most people what they thought about Google Translate, they'd probably say it's better than nothing. It wasn't very good, but like the alternative, what's the alternative? It's not, there really isn't even an alternative. And anyway, they can quantify that as well. There's a way to objectively measure translation results. And anyway, they have been working hard for years and making little bitty improvements. And last year, they took a whole different approach to it. They realized that there's some new technology, which for those that don't know, it was machine learning technology, that they could apply. And they did. And then they wanted to really test this because they didn't actually change anything about the experience of how you use Google Translate. But they just said, if this works, we should just see it in people's response. And so they rolled out the new Google Translate with 0 differences on the user interface. It looked identical. And then they waited to see what would happen. The most amazing thing was there was actually a poet in Japan who used Google Translate. He translates a lot of poetry from Japanese to English, and he kind of had his own process where he would start with Google Translate and then he'd get to work. And he put in a poem, and he's looking at the results. He's like, is this a trick? And he posts online, has anybody seen what's going on? I don't know what's happening, but this is actually really good, and that's impossible. And it turns out, yeah, they made more improvements to Google Translate in last year than in the 15 years they had worked on it before. And that's purely a technology-powered innovation for a great service. And of course, a classic one is the iPhone. iPhone is what, 10 years now, and it was a 3.5-year project for the first iPhone. And so we're talking a ways back, 14 years ago or so, when they were first figuring out the iPhone. One of the amazing things to me is one of the startups I got to work with that was a lot of fun was Skype. Skype, of course, was pretty big. Then they were acquired by Microsoft. Microsoft kind of has been messing with them, but let's just say but anyway, 600 million people use Skype. Right? It's a big service now. And anyway, when Skype was assembling a team, they actually hired an early iPhone product person, and then they hired also somebody from Motorola product team, because at the time Motorola was one of the main smartphone manufacturers, and another one from Nokia. Remember Nokia? They're also acquired by Microsoft. I don't know if that's a theme or not. But anyway, and I was at this dinner with them. And it was an amazing dinner because we were talking about, the iPhone had come out at the time of this dinner, and we were all like amazed by this iPhone. And we were talking, and we realized together that literally at the time Apple was designing this device, simultaneously at Nokia in Finland or wherever they are, and then Motorola in Illinois, those two companies, and probably BlackBerry too, but nobody from BlackBerry was at this dinner, they were all trying to figure out the next smartphone. So of course Nokia and Motorola did the old focus groups. And what do? They literally ask people to bring their current smartphone to the focus group. I don't know how many of you remember this, because you may not, this is a while ago, but the smartphone that was the cool one of the day was actually not a BlackBerry, it was the Trio. Do you guys remember the Palm Trio? Which was actually a successor to the BlackBerry. It looked a lot like a BlackBerry. It had the keyboard like a BlackBerry, but actually the screen was a touch screen, interestingly. A lot of people don't know that or don't remember that. And anyway, that's what people brought to these focus groups. They brought their Trios. And they sat down with them, and in a focus group, you basically asked them what they like in their next device. And the most consistent piece of feedback that both Motorola and Nokia got at these focus groups turned out to be the same thing. Love the keyboard, hate the touch screen, lose the touch screen. And if you remember, in fairness to them, the customers, you could barely use to dial a phone number. It was so bad. And of course, Apple would never ask this question. They go, why would you ask the customers this? They don't know about touchscreen technology, and can you blame them for saying that? Because the touchscreen they were given was terrible. But no, we don't ask. Apple knew that no, the touchscreen technology was barely getting started, and in fact it was so good we're going to throw away the keyboard, so we're going to go all in. Now, you could argue that Apple knew even more than Motorola and Nokia engineers knew about touchscreen technology, but that is their job, of course. And of course, the rest is history there. So those are all consumer companies. I also wanted to, Workiva is an example. They're not like a Zero. Zero for more small businesses and personal. This is for large enterprises, but it's really sophisticated finance stuff. The really thing, you may not have heard of Workiva because they're only in the US, but they went from nothing to, what was it, something like 80% of the Fortune 1000 are Workiva customers, almost overnight. And they went public on that. And the amazing thing about Workiva is that this is enterprise software, which historically is the worst stuff ever. And their products are rated higher, like with an NPS score, than Apple's products. That's unheard of in enterprise software. But they realized, and so this is stuff that accountants, finance departments, compliance departments that they use to do their things. But they realized that they saw, either the founders, 6 co-founders, they knew nothing about finance, none of them. But they saw the users because one of their friends' company was going public and they had to go through that whole process of filing and all that. And they saw it and they said, this is just inhuman what these poor accountants and finance people had to do and how to use. And so they realized they could completely reinvent that, which they did. Unlike the enterprise software companies, which are unfortunately still in the focus group and customer requirement world, they went out, they made some big technology bets. They were the earliest company to bet on Google's cloud offering. They actually built an entirely web-based version of Office, essentially, that was all cloud-based, all web-based. It was very impressive technology, and they grew probably faster than, to be honest, there's a new leader in enterprise that grew even faster than they did, which is Slack. Slack has done even faster. They're the new sort of leader in amazingly fast growth in enterprises. But so this approach, though, is not just for consumers and companies. All right, so there's just a bunch of examples. And what I wanted to talk about now was, if you believe that's where great innovations usually come from, then I wanted to talk about how we can make sure that you have a chance to do that. And so the first thing I need to say is that table stakes, this means like you don't have a chance if you don't at least do this. You have to hire strong engineers that care about your vision, that are passionate about your vision, what you're trying to do. So too many companies don't even do this, frankly. They hire engineers as contractors, for example, which is right off the bat, that's bad. You're not going to succeed. I don't know anybody who's actually done real innovation on a consistent basis using engineers as contractors. So this is a core competency, so we absolutely want, we don't need every engineer to be all in on the sort of invention side, but we need to make sure that you have at least 1 or 2 engineers on every product team that are seriously willing to contribute to figuring out the product, not just building the product. Some companies, like Facebook and Google, try only to hire engineers that way. They try to make it so that, no, that's all they want, are engineers that are all in like that. They call them smart creators, but that's their model. But even at Google, not all of the engineers are like that. Question?
I'm wondering, I've got issues with the passion thing in hiring. One of my most successful recent projects was about climate change, and I'm a climate change skeptic, and I was an engineer there, and it was my most successful project in the last few years. So,
Well, what's your point? Sorry.
I'm critical about this passionate thing.
You're
I
thinking you
think
don't-
engineers should be passionate about engineering, and you know, if what you do kind of is okay with them,
Well,
that's all right.
We're generalizing here, but in general, I would say that's not the level of professionalism of engineers we want. We want engineers that are passionate about engineering, but also want to solve real problems for customers. So that's the bar.
Okay,
And
no,
think you
I
can
fully
get
agree
even
with that.
higher. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so there are, did I miss a question? There are 5 keys here to leveraging engineers. First of all, you've got to provide your engineers with the full business context. A lot of product managers, especially and product owners, think that their job is to shelter the engineers. They're making a huge mistake. In fact, one of the ways we describe this is John Doerr, who's a famous venture capitalist. He likes to say, we need teams of missionaries, not teams of mercenaries. And this is a sign of that. If we want teams of missionaries, we need to provide them, we say the good, the bad, and the ugly, everything. Everything. So they need to understand if a product's losing money, if a company's losing money, if the customers are unhappy. A lot of engineers don't even realize how much pain their product causes their customers. They're sheltered from that. So you have to share with them the full business context. This is normally on the product manager to do, but that's everything. The financial, the marketing, sales, everything. Second, and this is really where a lot of the magic happens, you have to provide the engineers with direct access to your customers. Now it doesn't mean we bring all our engineers out to visit every customer every week. We don't do that. But we usually, first of all, best practice is we do visit customers every week, one way or another. We might do that remote, or we might do it, they come to us, we might go to them. But at least every week, general rule of thumb is to 3 customer tests. That's I can go into that if you want, but it's generally an hour each user interaction. And we'll do at least 3 of those every week. Every product team that's doing user-facing, customer-facing stuff. So there's a lot of interactions, and we like to bring at least 1 engineer with us to each of those. We'll typically rotate the engineers. But that's when the magic really happens. They have to see it directly. It's not the same if a product manager, or even worse, you delegate this to a user researcher to go do the user testing themselves and then give you a report. That's a complete waste of really valuable user research people and time. So that's the second big issue. Third, and this is a hard one, this is really where, and I mentioned this sort of distinction, product manager, product owner. Just to be clear, product owner is a responsibility, it's a role on an agile team. Product manager is a job in a tech product company. The product manager responsibilities includes the product owner responsibilities. But the product ownership responsibilities is like 10% of the job. So normally we talk in terms of the job is product manager, and that product manager needs to also play the role of the product owner. There's different issues if the product manager is not the product owner. So it is important that they are, but that's minor. Now, one of the differences, in fact, is this. What helps the engineers and the designers is not by giving them requirements. In fact, in modern product teams, they rarely talk about requirements. They talk about, we need to understand the underlying constraints. There are always underlying constraints. We were talking about one here that's basically Trade Me takes credit cards. Is a payment processor now, and one of the constraints that comes with being a processor is there's a lot of rules about protecting customer data, especially payment data. And so that has some implications, like we all had to sign that. That's a typical constraint, actually, for companies that do that. Unfortunately, a lot of companies will define requirements that they think that implies. And so they'll give you, like, go talk to somebody in finance, or you talk to somebody in engineering, and they say, yeah, here's the requirements. We have to do these 24 things. And then somebody, if it's just a weak product owner, they'll just pass that along to engineers, as these are what we have to build. It's a real product manager. They will dig in and understand the underlying constraints there. Because every time you can peel that back, constraints will give much more freedom to the engineers to come up with a great solution. If you just think your job is to give them requirements. In fact, this gets into an even more difficult topics. Pretty much every team I meet thinks or tells me they're agile. But when I really dig into it, they're really hardly agile in any meaningful way. And there's really three things that define that. I'm just going to throw this out at you. It might be a little intense for some of you if you haven't worked in this space for a while. But here's the thing. The first defining characteristic is there are 4 risks in product, in every tech product. 4 risks. Will the customer buy it or choose to use it? That's called value risk. Can the customer or user figure out how to use it? That's usability risk. Can we actually build it with the time we have, with the money we have, with the skill sets we have in engineering? That's called technical feasibility risk. And can this work for all aspects of our business? Finance, marketing, privacy, security, compliance, legal. That's called business viability risk. So every product has those risks. Sometimes it's a no-brainer, it's fine, and sometimes it's super hard. And all of those risks could be hard. It's just everything's in between. Those are the 4 risks in product. So the first sort of defining characteristic of whether you're agile or, well, it's not, whether you're really waterfall, is when are you able to test those things? If you can't test that until after your engineers build you something, even if you call it an MVP, but if that MVP takes 4 months to build, that's waterfall. That's one of the clear defining characteristics of waterfall. The defining characteristic of waterfall is all the risk is at the end. So if you can't test these things until after you built it, that's one. Second, if the way you think you define product is the product manager gathers up requirements and documents them, either in some requirements document or in user stories, and then gives it to a designer, and then they're told to come up with a design that implements those requirements, and then the designs and the requirements are given to the engineers, typically it's sprint planning, and they're told to estimate that and then to build that. That's the second defining characteristic of waterfall, just to be clear. And that's why I said earlier, the first time your engineers are seeing it is it's sprint planning, you've messed up. The reason that's so bad, that almost every great solution out there, and all the ones I gave you, it's not that the requirements drive the design, which drives the implementation. In fact, the technology often drives the functionality as much as the other way around. And all you have to do is look at your phone for many examples of this. It's typically that the enabling technology enables the designs, which enable the functionality. So they're completely intertwined. So in a real product team, not following a waterfall, the product manager, the designer, and the tech lead sit right next to each other because of this point. And then the third defining characteristic of waterfall is in waterfall, it's all about shipping a feature or a project probably coming from the roadmap at a specific date. It's all about output. The whole process is oriented about releasing something. And you can imagine lots of agile teams, that's what they do. It might be in a sprint or it might take 2 or 3 sprints, but if the result is that you have shipped something, that's waterfall. What we need to do is measure against business results, also known as outcome. So it's not about shipping features, it's about solving the underlying business problem. So if that business problem was our churn rate is 8%, it needs to get down under 5%. That's the business problem. And then our job as a product team is ship whatever we have to ship as many times as we need to until we get 5%. That's called success. Shipping features and projects is a hollow victory. That's not even something we talk about that much anymore because with continuous delivery it's happening all the time anyway, but it's not about output. So those are the 3 defining characteristics of waterfall. So many teams tell me they're agile, and they know all the lean startup buzzwords, and yet they have all 3 of those problems. So I have to tell them, sorry, I know you know the buzzwords, but you're still doing waterfall, and you need to change. And so that's what I'm describing here. If you, that was sort of a little bit of a digression, but that is why this is so important. We need to give our teams as much latitude as possible to come up with a solution, a design, and an implementation that works.
Do you find that there's easy levers to articulate? I want to produce churn, I want to acquire new customers, I want to, those are classics, right? And that's the business talk at that level often, because they're nice things to go forward. But sometimes when you're building product, you're several layers away from directly impacting something like that. It might take months before the impact of what you build happens. Like, are you going to need tips on how you sort of create intermediary goals that lead to the bigger ones?
Did everybody get that? That's actually an important topic that really speaks directly to that. We need to focus on results and not output. That's really what that one comes from. And of course, there's a technique it's a technique that's about halfway through our industry, OKRs. Anybody here use the OKR process? So a lot of you know. So, and that's what the process is for. So I want to kind of give 2 dimensions to that answer. It's actually a pretty complicated topic. And if you've tried OKRs, you probably haven't had a good experience with them for the first few times. I mean, safe guess for me. And this is usually why, because there's a lot of confusion about OKRs. So the first dimension is they exist at 2 levels, the company level and the product team level. And that's critical. Now the product team ones roll up. It's a linear tool. And so they're supposed to roll up into the company one. So the company one might include things like, we're going to double our revenue this year. Now, different teams, like I can talk TradeMe, I don't know that much about TradeMe, but TradeMe, like we were talking about, there's a jobs category. And so there's employers and job seekers. And so you could imagine there's big goals. Let's just imagine we're working at TradeMe, and we have, we're working on a jobs business unit. I don't know if it's managed as a separate little business unit, but let's say it is. So the GM for that would have some goals about probably growth. The teams, there might be a seeker team and an employer team, they would have different objectives. But here's the key, they are business objectives. Now I'll come back to an exception to that later, which is around the infrastructure teams. So hold that one off, that's get a little messier. But in terms of, let's say we've got a seeker team and an employer team, and they contribute into the overall job seeker business. Now, the second concern that often comes up is, yeah, but most of our business indicators are actually lagging indicators. And actually, I kind of asked for that feedback or that question because I picked churn. Churn is one of the worst case examples. Most of them are not as bad as churn. Most of them we could see much closer. But even if we didn't have the lagging indicator aspect, there's still often the argument, but we're not in control of everything, right? So let's say I'm working on just improving the number of resumes per seeker, number of resumes per posting for an employer. It's a pretty relevant, useful one for them. That's more in my wheelhouse, right? But there's still marketing campaigns, sales. What if it's a job nobody wants? What if, there's all kinds of elements there. What if it's in a part of the country that doesn't have supply, all that stuff. The idea of a system like this, and now you can start to see another example of the difference between a real product manager and just the product owner. Product owners will typically just punt on this and go to some executive and say, we'll just build whatever you say. In a real product manager, they are incented by the system to go figure it out. Literally go figure it out. And we have a tool, because the truth is there are many things that are going to impact these KPIs, not just our work. We have a great tool. This has always been called the product attribution problem. How do you know what your team is doing is what's actually helping or hurting? And the answer is an A/B test. For most of us, that's the go-to answer, because it can isolate the contribution of just our team's work. But mostly we tell product managers, step it up. The whole idea is, who is in a better position to influence that than the product team?
And to like have a hypothesis, right, that your OKR underneath the bigger ones, you're saying, I've got a hypothesis that if I achieve this objective in my wheelhouse, it'll have this impact.
Yeah, but I want to be clear, that stuff typically comes from the leaders. So the leaders will say, okay, we believe we need this month to happen. And so here is your team's objective. Now the way the OKR system works is then the team takes that objective and they propose the key results.
So you wouldn't get the teams to create their own objectives under the company.
There's nothing wrong with them pointing out, but you can see how this is a slippery slope. So the main reason the best companies like OKRs is because it's the replacement for product roadmaps. I haven't really talked about roadmaps yet. My guess is that most of you have them. They're like the root cause of most product evil in the world. And in that give and take, and why is that? Well, because roadmaps are just lists of features and projects, most of which are not going to work. Companies that have been around learned that a long time ago. I was just 2 weeks ago, I was with the Google Cloud team again, and at this point they've got a rule of thumb which says we're going to have to try 10 different ideas for each one that we find that works. So they're just using a 10-to-1 ratio. 10-to-1. They just know. And most people would argue that Google is not dumb. There might be a lot of things, but they're not dumb. And that if they're assuming that 90% of their ideas are not good. Yet people who do the old roadmaps are assuming that 100% of their ideas are good. What's wrong with this picture? And so what's really going on is when you ask a company to move from roadmaps to OKRs, there's a little bit of give and take here. So we're asking the executives, like the CEOs, please stop giving us a roadmap of a bunch of features, and instead give us your business objectives. You tell us what's most important for the business. But then let us go figure out the best way to solve it. It's probably more than you bargained for. But you can see how it's a big topic.
Are there two options, roadmaps or OKRs, or is there stuff between them?
Are there two?
Like you got roadmaps and OKRs.
Yes.
Is that? Are
The
they
only
your two options?
They're the main ones. There is a compromise called outcome-based roadmaps, which are basically OKRs in different guise. They look like a roadmap, so we pacify some of the executives. They're kind of very much addicted to roadmaps. Yeah, roadmaps. They do serve some real needs for the executives. They're two real needs. They want to know that you're working on the most important things. I think that's reasonable. OKRs also do that same idea. You're asking them to give you the prioritized needs. And the other one is they want to know roughly when things are going to happen. And in fairness to them, they're trying to run a business. So like if there's a big marketing campaign needed for employers, when we have this new employer functionality, they need to know, is that gonna happen this quarter or next quarter or never? When is it gonna happen? That's fair, I think. We have ways to address all of those with the other systems, but we have to acknowledge that it's needs. If you just go to OKRs and you just tell every team, go propose your own objectives, you're gonna have,
They have to sit underneath the business objectives.
yeah,
There's a hierarchy, right?
but there's a big reconciliation, which is trivial if there's only one or two teams. But if you're, I'm guessing Trade Me and Zero have, well, Trade Me's probably got on the order of 30 to 50 teams. Is that maybe product teams? It's a lot of product teams. That's not going to happen on its own. This is where the heads of product, head of design, head of engineering, they need to play really active roles, especially head of product, in making sure these objectives are aligned. You just don't want to, it defeats the purpose if you tell the team what results they're supposed to get. Because this whole idea is to empower teams. There's actually two concepts behind OKRs. You can see it's all big thing of thread, it just keeps unraveling here. But the first goal is that people do a lot better if you tell them what you hope they achieve rather than how to do the job. I mean, that's an old principle, but I think it's really true. That does assume a certain level of skill. So if you hire professionals, this is not a safe assumption if you're using contractors for core stuff, but if you hire professionals, they'll do a lot better if you tell them the result you're looking for, like figure out how to get it to 3%, or figure out how to, improve this KPI, or we need everybody who posts a job to get a better response in terms of candidates, things like that. And the second principle behind OKRs is performance is only measured by results. So it's all about hitting those results. It doesn't matter how many features you launch. If it doesn't solve the problem, you fail. Those are the principles behind OKRs. And so we're trying to empower these teams. That's what's meant by an empowered autonomous team. And the teams then are able to figure out the best way to solve the problems. So really the best, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, they've all been using OKR system for more than a decade, so this is not new, but it's still most companies even in Silicon Valley, it's only like half the companies have switched over. Yeah?
There's also impact mapping. Impact mapping, let me answer the question, is there something else than a roadmap and OKR? There's also impact mapping?
Impact mapping, yeah. I have never seen that positioned as an alternative to that, more of a technique, but maybe I just haven't seen it. Okay, so a couple other points. You need to give your engineers time in discovery to help come up with a great solution. And again, a lot of people think that if they're not coding, there's some big, that's an awful thing, awful. It's not much time that's needed, but they need, normally the rule of thumb is a half hour a day, every day they should be participating in discovery. You can get a whole lot of value out of that, even with that cost. And then finally, I think there's a couple more. We want to measure teams as a whole. This actually gets back to the OKR topic because we want to make sure, one of the other big common mistakes companies make when they move to OKRs, they have company level objectives, that's not the issue. But instead of giving the recruiter team and the seeker team a set of objectives, they give the engineers an objective, design objective, product objective, QA objective. That's the mistake. They make them as functional team objectives, not product team objectives. And what that means is that everybody on the team has their own agenda, because they're all being evaluated differently. Now what we need to do, of course, is measure the team as a whole. So if the team is tasked with solving whichever problem, and they succeed or fail together, it's kind of the idea. And then, this is a big one, because this is where, honestly, if I had to pick one area where companies really fall down, it's typically here. They do not have the product managers that they need. Some of them are really, don't have the level of engineers they need, or some don't have the level of design they need, but in most cases I know that's not their issue. Their issue are the product managers. The product managers are not skilled to the level they need to be at. That's why and I didn't always do this. I used to just be fine with considering product owner and product manager synonymous. But you know what happened? A lot of people went to the CSPO class to be certified Scrum product owner. They came back and they thought they were product managers. I mean, a lot, like literally probably 90% of our industry, that's the training the people that are doing the product role have had. And that's, of course, I'm an advocate. Everybody should take CSPO training or whatever method your team is using. You should learn that. But that is like 10% of the job. And it's not even the thinking part of the job. It's the other 90%. And so we really did see, and the way I saw it was CEOs started getting really frustrated with the quality of their product owners, product managers. And that's when it's like, what happened? Well, I realized one of the things that happened is we have these people thinking they're product managers and they're not. Now, they can be trained in it if they're up for it, but it's a super hard job, and I warn people of that. But we need strong product managers. What does that really mean? People that are very smart, very creative. What I mean by creative in particular is, the kind of weak product managers, the way they answer every question or the way they solve every problem is add more features. Just add features, because that's easy. Our teams can crank out features, especially with Agile. But it doesn't actually work, rarely works. Features, I'm really cynical at this point in my career about features. I'd rather remove them than add them. But usually we have to think more broadly to come up with a good solution. And then the third part for great product managers, they've got to be persistent. There's just always lots of reasons things don't succeed or won't get out, and we need to get over them. So smart, creative, and persistent. Yeah.
How do you successfully find and hire people that
So there's a number of things as far as, first of all, where do we find them? The bigger issue for most companies is they are so busy with other things. That's the thing that usually we have to fix first. So I'll answer that part first, which is they should not be playing designer, and they should not be playing project manager, and they should not be playing QA. Those are the three things that usually suck up most of the time for the product manager. They need to be playing the role of the product manager, which we can go into more. And then, so we're looking for people that can really focus on that. Where we find them, I always tell people, because this is unlike design or engineering where there are actual programs to really develop. This is a different thing. You're really looking for somebody with those three characteristics. In my experience, if you can find that smart, creative, persistent, you can turn them into a great product manager. It's a lot easier, obviously, if they can have a chance to work for a manager that's been there, done that for a couple years. I just gave you the Google MO. What they try to do is hire people with these three characteristics, and they put them under a director of product management that's been there, done that, and for 1 to 2 years, they get like daily to a minimum weekly coaching on how to get better. And usually at the end of that, they're pretty strong. But that is, that's our favorite. There's other techniques too, for sure, but that's what we're looking for. I tell the CEOs, because that's really where you guys start with this, that the product managers, they should know every product manager by name, and they should believe that each one is a future leader of the company. So it's that caliber. You might have heard the phrase, the CEO of the product. The product manager is supposed to be the CEO of the product. Some people hate that phrase because they think it means the product manager is the boss of somebody, but they're not. But just to be clear, the product manager is never the boss of anybody. It is an individual contributor role. So just to make sure we're on the same page there. The reason they're referred to as the CEO of the product is because in order to do that job, you have to know all elements of your business. That's what you bring to the team. You have to know the financial issues, the marketing issues, the sales capabilities, sales issues. You have to know the security issues, like we were just talking about, legal issues, your Uber or Airbnb. And so that's what's meant by CEO of the product. Understand all elements of your business. Because your engineers and your designer are counting on you to know that and bring that to the team. If you don't do that, where will they get it? And what really happens is you get these, product owner that isn't knowledgeable about these things, and now the only way they can answer those questions is to call a meeting or escalate up to the CEO. So that's where you start to see the symptoms show up.
Did you see, like, if you cast your mind back to the early days of the music industry, and maybe I don't know how quickly the product leadership roles evolved over that time. I know here we have a real shortage of people in product leadership roles, and so whether you saw good feed-ins from other disciplines, which people who make good product managers, what sort of people came from other disciplines?
Well, I mean, product's always been interesting that way. It's taken people from all over. When I get introduced into a company, it's typical that some of the people in the product role are clearly, you can see they're very high potential. They just need some coaching, they'll be great. And other ones have no business in that role. And so I have to, but often I'll meet enough other people in the company that I'll say, that person that we talked to in the data team or in the marketing team, why is she over there? This is where you need to use her, highest and best use, right? Because what companies are all about, making their customers happy. Customers are buying your products. These are the people responsible for those products. So it's a strong argument that if you've got that talent out there, put them in these positions. And, the product role is not, it is a hard role. It's not for everybody, but it is it's not an accident that the number one path, at least in Silicon Valley, to becoming a startup CEO is product management. I mean, it's not an accident. It's the proving ground for future CEOs.
I reckon that there's qualities of good product people, right? You've talked a little bit about having to engage all various stakeholders, from customers to the team to the CEO. Like that's not in everyone's ability spectrum. And, some people like the details, some people like technology. Finding someone who likes all of it and can engage with it.
Yeah, and it's not even everybody has their preferences about what they like, but they have to understand and do what they need to do. Again, sort of CEO. I've never met a CEO that likes all aspects of being a CEO, but they know they have to do it. Yeah, some of them hate raising money. Some of them hate dealing with customers. I know some that hate dealing with customers. They know if they don't do that, they have no chance. And so it's just, they all come from different areas. Yeah. So good. But this is a big one. You have to make sure that the engineers have that product manager we're talking about. So the only other point I should make is confidence. What I'm really speaking to there is that every once in a while, you guys have all seen the product manager that, and by the way, these are usually male product managers that do this, but they always act like they know the answer, even when everybody on the team knows they don't know the answer. That's when they're truly confident. They know that they can say, I don't know, but I'll go find out. And really, that's what the team needs. They need somebody that they can trust. And, yeah. So, yeah. How are we doing on time? It was about an hour. How about any questions on any of this stuff anybody wants to ask about? Yeah.
Could you recap the 3 characteristics a potential product manager should have?
The smart, creative, persistent.
Okay.
Smart, creative, persistent. And I should say, that's sort of the nature of what we look for. The 4 responsibilities of a modern product manager, because I didn't say that. Deep bringing to your team, deep knowledge of your customers, really deep knowledge, how they work, how they make a purchase decision, how they buy, everything. Deep knowledge of how your users and customers use your product, that's the data side. The web analytics, the Salesforce.com analytics there, data warehouse, how the product is actually used. Third is deep knowledge of your industry, the competitive landscape, the major industry trends. And the 4th one is deep knowledge of how your business works. This is who are all the stakeholders we were just talking about. This is the one that most people think of when they hear CEO of the product. It's understanding all the stakeholders and having a relationship with them, understanding what their constraints are, and basically having enough relationship with them where they believe that you understand their constraints and that you will only bring them solutions that work within those constraints. Those are the 4 things a product manager has to bring to their team. You probably know what the designers bring and what the engineers bring, but it's often not clear what the product manager brings. As you can see, that's way more than a product owner who's working on a backlog. That's really good. It's like I expect every product manager to know how to use the analytics tools and get training if you haven't been trained. Just like we expect every product manager to understand the development process and to know your responsibilities in that process. So I don't want to give the wrong impression. You should be trained as a product owner, but it's just the easy stuff. Yeah?
Marty, you spoke a bit about OKRs for infrastructure teams, but didn't maybe delve into that. So I was interested in what you might define as an infrastructure team in that context and how they might deal with OKRs.
Right. So in that example, if we go back to our job site, we have the jobs business or category, and then we have employers and job seekers. Those are all easy because those are business level solutions. But let's say you have a common, they're sometimes called infrastructure teams, platform teams, shared services teams, but you know what I mean. These are the teams that have the common stuff that all the teams leverage. Does everybody know what I mean? Things like authentication and registration, and managing user profiles. We all have our own. But that would be actually in the jobs one, user profiles would probably be a good example. So those are, because those teams, by definition, are there to help the other teams. So they're not there explicitly to help customers or the business, they're there to help the other teams to provide help for customers or the business. So because of that, we bend the rules. It's much harder to give on an OKR a business objective. So we just kind of bend the rule on that one. And we just are fine with that. We just acknowledge that they are there for a purpose of helping the other team.
So what's a good way, when you say bend the rules, what's a good way you've seen to bend the rules and give them some kind of meaningful objective they can follow?
Basically, there's 2 ways, but by far the most common one is that they are actually measured against their ability to help those other teams deliver on their objectives, so that they're in it together. And the other way is to just give them some output. We allow them to say, this quarter we will ship this. On the other teams, we look down on that because that's output, not results. Question? Yeah.
So how do you make the case of that we need to listen to customers when people ask the question at the start, or making the statement of, no customer is going to tell you so and so, such and such? Yeah,
well, so we just know, so hopefully I did make sure I said, you need to be out there face-to-face with customers. Basically, every modern team today is doing quantitative and qualitative testing every week. And so there's no question. And the reason we have to do both, the data tells us what's happening, but it can't tell us why. The qualitative testing we do is to help us figure out why. Like, why isn't it working? We thought we'd be making all this money, we're not. Why not? The qualitative is what helps us do that. That's why we go to customers. We don't go to them to ask them what we should build for them. We go to them to find out why they're not buying what we already have or buying what our prototype would be. In general, it's called a user test. There's a lot of ways to do this, but a user test is a usability test followed by a value test. It's just trying to understand why the value is not there for them. So lots of customer interaction. That's what Jeff Bezos meant when he said the second biggest mistake is not talking to your customers. So it is not okay not to make those. You've got to go out to your customers a lot and bring a developer with you.
Right. In the design thinking kind of process, or just design process in general, there's usually a phase of discovery where you go to observe your customers. Do you see that as a conflict, or is still a relevant part of what product managers?
Sure, let's put it in context. So design sprints are actually one of my favorite techniques it's a discovery technique for specific kinds of problems. It, like every technique, that happens to be one I like a lot and do recommend a lot, but like every technique, there is no one technique for everything. So for certain problems, it's awesome. They're exhausting. So if you've done one, I mean, usually it's more like you do one every 2 or 3 months because they're exhausting, but they are amazing. So it's a discovery technique alongside lots of other techniques. A good product team needs to have lots of techniques. And that does, depending on whose design sprint methodology you're using, there may be more user research up front or less. Of course, what's really important about a design sprint is that we are iterating on solutions and we are validating with real customers. That's the most important point. However you get there. There's a lot of different, to me, I see all the different design sprint enthusiasts and discovery coaches, which is basically what they do. They all have their own approaches, but they all have these things in common, and it's all good. Yeah?
If you're trying to dig yourself out of that roadmap health sort of situation, do you see a difference in behaviour between businesses that are B2C versus businesses that are selling to other enterprises? Often where that other enterprise says, I'll pay you for a list of features.
So, there's no question enterprises have suffered in terms of product forever. The quality of what comes out. Now, is it easier in a consumer company or a small business company in this respect? Yes. One of the reasons is because a small business or a consumer, if some user says, oh, I'll give you $5 if you do this feature, nobody's going to look. But if an enterprise says, I'll give you $500,000, then most CEOs will roll over and do anything, right? They'll just roll over. And so that is what, that creates a special. A few of those, your product is doomed. We know that. I mean, we all know that. That's the plague. That happens in the enterprise world. And so it takes a lot more discipline in the enterprise world. I'm so happy that now there's a wave of enterprise products like Workiva, like SuccessFactors, like Workday that have really disrupted that space because they don't have to live with SAP anymore, stuff like that. So that's been good. It's also true that when you're selling with a direct sales force, that they will often hear from the customer that the customer wants the roadmap. And that may be where you're coming from. Now, first of all, a lot of companies are not allowed to give out the roadmap because it's considered a forward-looking statement. And so they get in trouble if they don't deliver on that roadmap, which would be most of the time, right? So but first of all, we have to step back because what the customer really wants, and I think this is fair, they are making a bet on you. They're not signing up just for this month. They're signing up for like 5 years, 10 years. And so they want to know if where you're going is where they want to go. Now, most of them, the only way they know to ask for that is via roadmap. What they're really much more valuable to them and more valuable to us is to share with them the product vision. There's another great quote from Jeff Bezos, which is, be stubborn on your product vision, but flexible on your details. And the idea is the roadmap is the details. So when you lock yourself in the roadmap, that's bad. But the vision is serious. That's like we're on board. When they make a decision, it's a 7-year investment decision. So that's where I'll typically try to do. Let's get them focused on the vision. And I like to share it. I'm fine sharing it.
You're still open to, like a marketing team can't plan for a release next week on a vision, right? So there's a window.
But that's different.
There's a window of.
Everybody hear that? So because the one need was for sales, and that's what I was just speaking to. You're bringing up another need. This how do you run a business point? And I realized I didn't share how we do that. So let's say marketing needs to know when they can turn on a certain campaign, and so they can't just wait until the product says, oh, it's ready, because it could take like 3 months before they can ramp all that stuff up. And so that's called in the model that I advocate. It's called a high integrity commitment. High integrity commitment. And the way it works is that we do enough discovery on it, just enough. Remember the 4 risks: value, usability, feasibility, and viability. Just enough to answer the questions so that we know that we have a solution and how long it will really take us to build. And then we're fine committing to that date, but not before. And then once we do, then we deliver on that. That's called a high integrity commitment. And that is what meets the needs for the when is this going to
But in your book, you talk about the high what do you call it?
high integrity commitment.
High integrity commitment as an exception to the rule.
Yeah,
Or is
well,
it
what I'm
always the
pointing,
case that at a certain point you kind of know, hey, next month it's going to happen.
you do, but you don't need to share that. It's only the exceptions where that, like marketing has a big program, or maybe you've got a big partnership with Xero across the street, and so you need to agree on a date for something. That's more of the exception. Most things on a roadmap don't do that. This gets to a little bit of the culture of the CEO, and when they like to, sometimes they think that the way we get more out of the team is giving them these aggressive dates.
Yes.
You've all seen the type. Yeah.
Just wanting to, so around your advice about how to kind of discover new products, if I paraphrase it to something like you want to listen to your customers about their problems, but not listen to them about the solutions they want.
That's fair. That's a good way to say it. Yeah, the way we usually phrase it is fall in love with the problem, not the solution, for us. But that's good. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a question around, so a lot of the companies you've mentioned there are really forward-thinking, leading companies. But have you gone into like companies in a traditional structure, old school, and you're trying to convince them to go to these new methods? And what barriers have you encountered them, and how have you overcome them?
Yeah. One of the companies that I showed was what you're describing. That was Disney, and that was super hard.
Because that's a whole journey like to go through for.
It is.
Yeah.
Now, so what you're getting, but even separate, because Disney, okay, they did it. Ultimately, I think what made Disney motivated is they are truly passionate about making the customers totally adore them. That is kind of their business. So having that, I think, is what motivated them to pay whatever they need to pay and do it. It's a lot harder though. We were talking about this, there are a lot of bigger companies, older companies out there that like 10, 20 years ago, they had a passionate founder that led them to do some great things, and now that person is, on a boat somewhere, cruising the world, and then they've lost all that, and they've lost their ability to really consistently innovate, and they just kind of moved into this conservative model. I'm actually describing most big companies that have really lost their ability to do this. And some of them, they realize that they have a near-death experience. They realize too late. This is happening a lot, mostly because of Amazon. Amazon is disrupting one industry after the next. And so they will often call and say, hey, we now are bored, we have to get started. And it's like it's already too late. I mean, if they would have started 5 years ago, they could have started building these muscles, but it's hard. There are some, though, that have done that transformation, and I love them. I just wish there were more. CarMax is a great example in the US that has really transformed from truly old school. A really amazing one, and you wouldn't think of them, and I didn't think originally that I didn't think of them as an old school company, but Adobe. Adobe they were pre-internet. I mean, they've been around a long time, and they have made so much money. And they were actually able to disrupt themselves like Microsoft is still trying to do. I actually think Microsoft is turning the corner now, but for a long time, they didn't. And Adobe's managed to do that transition. I wrote about that one actually in my book. You can read about it. But that's, most people think of them, oh yeah, they're already a tech company, but they were early. Yeah, I wish there were more. There's a few banks that have succeeded in this kind of transformation, but it's hard, and it's because it's culture we're talking about. They have to change their culture.
Well, it ties up well with the last product tank meetup that was here, where traditional agile values and principles don't really align with traditional management methods, and until, I don't know, those people phase out of the industry and the new methods of management grow, that
I have a different take on it. Once in a while I'll meet a team that's not agile, and I will pretty much humiliate them into going to agile immediately, because it's a non-starter. But I also tell them agile doesn't fix these issues. Agile is minor compared to what we're talking about. And so countless teams have moved to agile and have said, this is it? What do we get? We get features faster. That's basically what they get. And so agile is not about agile. Agile is a relatively small part. If you're interested in that, Google the term product fail. And I gave a keynote article that describes why that's the case. It's not about agile. Agile is just like a little piece of it. It's really not even the major pieces of it. So a lot of companies successfully convert to agile, but they don't get the benefits.